Hi guys, this is BAWLER and we have news for you. Subscribe now. In a single scorching strike, Ukraine has eliminated one of Russia's most valuable battlefield surveillance assets. A $46 million Zaslan radar system, an advanced piece of technology, was reduced to flaming wreckage by a Ukrainian drone. But this wasn't an ordinary radar. It was a bizarre fusion of desperation, a naval sensor system originally built for warships, awkwardly mounted onto a truck and deployed inland. Why would such a device be seen so far from the sea? The answer is stark. Russia is running out of viable alternatives, and quickly. To understand how this highly specialized radar ended up on dry land, we must examine what makes the Zaslan so rare, why it was operating hundreds of miles from its intended environment, and what its destruction suggests about growing vulnerabilities within Russia's military infrastructure. Video footage shows a Ukrainian drone descending toward the truck-mounted radar in what appears to be the moments before impact. The actual explosion isn't shown, but it's strongly implied that the radar system and the truck it was mounted on were either severely damaged or completely destroyed. Although the location of the strike wasn't directly confirmed, Russian military bloggers supported the identification of the radar as a Zaslan and acknowledged it was successfully targeted by Ukrainian forces. Ukraine's military reported via telegram that the attack took place in Russia's Kursk region, a location where Ukraine had previously launched a successful incursion. This further supported the claim. Moreover, Ukraine's Raid 413 Battalion, part of the Unmanned Systems Forces, essentially elite drone units, confirmed that this was the first time they had encountered and successfully struck this type of radar. This event could mark a significant turning point in the ongoing conflict. If you're familiar with Russian military equipment, this incident would immediately raise eyebrows. The Zaslan radar that Ukraine destroyed is a naval system, meant to operate on warships, not on roads. Originally developed for the Russian Navy's Black Sea Fleet, the Zaslan is one of the most capable radar systems in Russia's maritime arsenal. It's engineered to track surface ships, low-flying aircraft, and even detect periscopes under favorable conditions. In essence, it serves as a warship's full-spectrum surveillance system, delivering 360-degree situational awareness across sea-based battle spaces. Unsurprisingly, technical information about the Zaslan is limited. The NZ-007 variant of the radar shares its designation with an older aircraft radar dating back to the late 1980s, when Russia was still part of the Soviet Union. That version, designed for air platforms, could detect targets more than 125 miles away, including aircraft with radar cross-sections as small as 172 square feet. Though modern stealth aircraft and cruise missiles present smaller radar signatures, the Soviet engineers behind the Zaslan were already preparing for those challenges. When mounted on aircraft, the Zaslan radar forms part of Russia's early warning network, capable of identifying large-scale threats while flying over its own territory. But the radar Ukraine hit appears to be a separate, modernized naval version, the Zaslan MF, developed independently of the aircraft version. Operating in the S-band 2.0-4.0 GHz, the Zaslan MF was created to equip small corvettes with sensor capabilities typically reserved for larger warships. The S-band represents an optimal balance in radar technology. It provides greater resolution than long-range L-band systems, while being less affected by weather than high-resolution X-band radars. This makes it ideal for naval operations in the turbulent conditions of the Black Sea. The radar's detection range underscores its strategic role. It can identify aircraft up to 185 miles away, roughly the distance from Sevastopol to Odessa, providing up to 15 minutes of reaction time against incoming threats at cruise speed. It can also detect surface targets within a 30-mile radius, offering early warning against naval drones or attack boats. But raw range is just part of the picture. The Zaslan MF's real strength lies in its capacity to track up to 100 targets simultaneously. In today's combat environments, where massed attacks involving missiles, drones, and decoys are the norm, this radar's ability to manage multiple threats is critical. Analysts speculate that the unit Ukraine hit had been heavily upgraded, possibly tracking up to 200 targets, a four-fold increase, likely enabled by enhanced software and computing systems. Another key capability of the Zaslan MF is its 3D tracking. Unlike older 2D systems that measure only distance and bearing, the Zaslan provides altitude data as well, which is essential for distinguishing between sea-skimming missiles and high-flying aircraft. On board a ship, the radar integrates with weapons systems, fire control computers, and command centers. Its position on a warship's tower ensures optimal coverage, and the ship's power systems allow continuous operation. The entire setup is designed for maritime conditions, saltwater cooling, shock-resistant mounts for rough seas, and seamless integration with shipboard systems. Which begs the question, why was it strapped to a truck? One explanation could be that the system was simply in transit to a warship, but this theory falls apart under scrutiny. Russia already has robust infrastructure for transporting ship components to its ports and naval bases, far from the front lines. Moreover, the drones used in Ukrainian kamikaze strikes lack the range to operate deep within Russian territory unless launched from nearby. A more plausible theory is that Russia is scrambling to reinforce its coastal radar coverage. With so many Russian vessels destroyed or damaged by Ukraine's Neptune missiles and naval drones, radar coverage has dwindled. In the early days of the war, Russia had successfully blockaded Ukraine's access to the Black Sea, but Ukraine has since driven back the Russian fleet, which now keeps its distance from Ukrainian shores. Despite these shifts, the need for radar surveillance hasn't gone away. In fact, it's more urgent than ever. Mounting radar systems on mobile platforms like trucks allows Russia to fill coverage gaps along the coast, even if those systems can't provide offensive capabilities on their own. Yet Ukraine has changed tactics. Its recent focus has been less about destroying ships and more about undermining Crimea's utility as a logistics hub. That brings us to another possibility. The radar was being used entirely inland, as a land-based surveillance tool. This theory gains traction considering the radar was spotted on a truck and reportedly struck in the Kursk region, far from any coastline. If the location is accurate, it suggests Russia may be repurposing naval radars for terrestrial use to compensate for the heavy losses its ground-based air defense network has sustained. Ukrainian forces have methodically destroyed many of Russia's traditional air defense radars across the front. Desperation breeds improvisation. Repurposing shipboard radars for land use comes with numerous technical headaches. Naval radars like the Zaslan rely on cooling systems that draw from the sea. These would have to be completely overhauled for use on land, likely replacing water-based cooling with bulky air systems. Power is another issue. Ships provide consistent high-output power generation. Truck-mounted versions would need customized generators to meet the radar's demands. And then there's the software. Targeting algorithms designed for maritime threats may not function properly in land environments where terrain clutter and different target profiles complicate detection. It's like using a submarine periscope as a home security camera. It might work in principle, but it's completely out of its element. Mounting is another engineering challenge. Ship radars benefit from stable, high-elevation platforms. A truck, especially on rugged terrain, introduces vibration and instability, conditions that can degrade radar accuracy or even physically damage sensitive components. To be operational, the radar would have to remain stationary and positioned relatively close to the front, where Ukraine could strike it. Though its theoretical range is about 186 miles, Ukraine has demonstrated the ability to hit well beyond that with long-range drones and missiles. It's important to note that this radar isn't tied to a weapon system like the S-400 or Pantsir. It doesn't launch missiles, it simply provides surveillance data. That makes it a partial replacement for destroyed air defense radars, but the trucks it's mounted on lack the mobility and protection of purpose-built military platforms. In the end, perhaps the most revealing aspect of this story is what it says about Russian military planning. Adapting a specialized maritime system for land use, despite all the complications, highlights a growing sense of strain, and perhaps even desperation, within Russia's armed forces. Modern militaries plan for equipment losses and maintain reserves to replace what is destroyed in combat. Russia's recent decision to cannibalize naval assets, repurposing shipboard radar systems for ground operations, strongly suggests that pre-war planning underestimated battlefield attrition or overestimated the industrial base's ability to compensate. Ukraine's successful strike against this improvised radar platform underscores both its evolving capabilities and the vulnerability of Russia's ad hoc solutions. The destruction of a mobile radar, especially one that should never have been operating in the area where it was found, demonstrates the effectiveness of Ukrainian intelligence. This strike was not an isolated event, but part of a sustained campaign to degrade Russian air defense capabilities. Over the past 6 months, Ukraine has conducted a series of successful attacks on high-value radar installations. These include two 48 YA6K1 podlet radars, two 1L125 Niobe SV electronic warfare systems, three 39N6 Kasta 2E2 tracking radars, a 9S19 Imbir fire control radar, and both Nebo-M and 59N6E Protivnik GE units, all within Crimea in March. Other targets include a Utes TM radar destroyed that same month, a 1L122 Garmin radar in January, and another podlet radar in November. This systematic dismantling of Russia's radar network has drawn comparisons to NATO's most advanced SEAD, suppression of enemy air defenses, operations. The campaign has served two critical purposes. First, It proves that Ukraine can strike strategic Russian military infrastructure far from the front lines. These are not localized skirmishes, but deep penetration precision strikes that reflect either advanced long-range munitions guided by accurate intelligence or highly capable special operations forces. Second, these attacks expose gaps in Russian air defense. The systems that were supposed to detect and prevent Ukrainian attacks have failed, either because they were insufficiently protected or because they were simply incapable of recognizing incoming threats in time. This failure triggers cascading problems across Russia's integrated air defense network. Modern IADs, integrated air defense systems, rely on overlapping radar coverage, each unit supporting the next, creating a web of detection zones. But when Ukraine destroys even one radar node, it opens a gap. The remaining radars must compensate, increasing their own emissions and risk of detection. Each successful Ukrainian strike compounds the problem, forcing Russian defenses to work harder, emit more, and ultimately become easier to target. This leads to one of the most strategically devastating aspects of Ukraine's campaign, targeting the sensors instead of the shooters. While destroying an S-400 missile launcher may generate headlines, disabling the radar that guides it renders the entire battery useless. Without radar, these systems are effectively blind, costly launchers incapable of identifying targets. It is in part thanks to this radar suppression that Ukraine has endured, despite being outmatched on paper. Russia may possess more long-range weapons and artillery, but without reliable targeting and surveillance data, much of that firepower is wasted. Russia often resorts to firing blindly at frontline positions, an approach that is not only inefficient but also detectable. Ukrainian drone operators can trace artillery trajectories back to their origin, creating opportunities for rapid counterstrikes. Furthermore, Ukraine has not limited itself to radar hunting. It has simultaneously targeted munitions depots deep inside Russian territory, facilities critical to sustaining artillery operations and air defense batteries. Many of these depots store specialized missiles used in systems like the S-300, S-400, and Pantsir. When those missiles are destroyed, the launchers become vulnerable radar stations, and then they too can be eliminated with less risk of interception. There's also a technological mismatch at play. Artillery and short-range systems are inherently vulnerable to drones. Their firing signatures can be tracked in real time, and they require static positioning to be accurate. As both sides adopt fire-and-forget tactics, shoot and immediately redeploy, the side with better surveillance gains a crucial advantage. But beyond the physical impact of these strikes lies a powerful psychological effect. Depriving Russian radar crews of reliable detection tools creates fear. Operators must choose between emitting radar signals, risking detection, or staying silent and forfeiting situational awareness. This dilemma degrades morale and operational efficiency, even among units that haven't yet been hit. Ukraine's expanding radar suppression effort is directly tied to its boldest ground operations, particularly the cross-border incursions into Kursk and Belgorod. The Kursk operation, launched in August 2024, was far more than a territorial raid. For the first time since World War II, a foreign force held ground inside internationally recognized Russian territory. This shattered the Kremlin's narrative of military invincibility and shocked the Russian public. Strategically, the Kursk foothold functioned like an unsinkable aircraft carrier. From this position, Ukrainian forces could observe Russian troop movements, launch artillery strikes on critical supply hubs, and deploy special operations teams to sabotage infrastructure. Every Russian unit sent to Kursk to contain the operation was one less available for offensive actions in the Donbass or elsewhere. It took Moscow more than 6 months to suppress the Kursk operation, and even now, pockets of territory remain contested. Perhaps most revealing was Russia's struggle to adapt. Moscow prioritized slow, grinding offensives in the Donbass, while diverting troops across vulnerable terrain to contain the Kursk incursion. The result was a dispersion of forces that led to higher casualties and strategic confusion. Ukraine, meanwhile, learned from the experience. Its subsequent Belgorod operations showed a clear tactical evolution. These were not static occupations, but rapid, targeted raids designed to strike high-value assets and withdraw before a coordinated Russian response. These incursions weren't just militarily effective, they were psychologically devastating. Militarily, they forced Russia to reassign troops from offensive duties to homeland defense. Politically, they gave Ukraine bargaining chips for any future negotiations. Psychologically, they demonstrated that Ukraine could strike anywhere, anytime, eroding confidence in Russia's ability to control the war's direction. The connection between radar suppression and cross-border raids becomes clear when examining operational requirements. These strikes depend on precise intelligence, early warning of Russian reinforcements, and secure withdrawal corridors. By dismantling Russian radar networks, Ukraine creates the conditions for these raids to succeed. Furthermore, Ukrainian presence on Russian soil complicates Moscow's decision-making. Russia must now consider the risk of civilian casualties on its own territory before deploying powerful weapon systems. Supply lines once considered safe must now be defended in depth. Every rear area assumption must be re-evaluated. In this sense, the radar campaign and territorial incursions are two halves of the same strategic coin. By blinding Russian sensors, Ukraine enables offensive ground operations. And those operations, in turn, expose new radar assets for targeting, creating a feedback loop of Russian degradation. This synergy is why tactical victories like the destruction of a truck-mounted Zaslan radar carry outsized importance. Each destroyed radar not only yields immediate battlefield benefits, but unlocks cascading effects across multiple domains of warfare. All of which brings us to the core issue. Russia is likely reaching a point of desperation. The need to mount naval radars on trucks, designed for ships and repurposed for land, is symptomatic of deeper logistical failures. When militaries begin cannibalizing systems across branches, it signals severe resource constraints and strategic miscalculations. Such improvisation may solve short-term problems, but creates new vulnerabilities. For Ukraine, the lesson is clear. Exploit every weakness. If Russia lacks ground-based radars, force them into increasingly desperate adaptations. If cross-border raids overstretch their forces, expand the tempo. If suppressed radar allows air operations, use that freedom to hunt even more radars. These developments are being closely watched by the international community. NATO analysts are studying Ukraine's radar hunting tactics for future applications. Chinese observers are analyzing Russian shortcomings for insights into their own defense systems. Arms manufacturers are racing to develop countermeasures to restore balance in the sensor-shooter equation. As eventual negotiations come into view, Ukraine's position strengthens with each tactical success. Holding territory in Kursk or Belgorod provides leverage. Russia's degraded military capacity limits its ability to impose conditions, and the psychological impact of successful operations inside Russia chips away at domestic support for the war. In the end, that hastily mounted naval radar, destroyed far from any coastline, captures the current phase of this war in a single image. Russia, despite its numerical superiority, is adapting out of desperation. Ukraine, smaller but more agile, is showing how precision, planning, and innovation can achieve outsized strategic effects. But what do you think? Will Russia's makeshift solutions, like truck-mounted ship radars, hold back the tide, or are we witnessing the beginning of systemic failure? Can Ukraine's radar hunting campaigns and cross-border raids continue forcing Moscow onto the defensive?